1. Hello, my name is Shania. I turned 20 in August. I grew up normal, I'd hope to say and think. Live on a small Indian reservation in Minnesota. Family is very traditional, meaning we are spiritual and practice our culture's traditions. I'm not entirely sure if this explains what experiences I had as a child, but neither have I reached out to anyone or told anyone. My brother is a medicine man, and I'm thinking about talking to him about it one day, but growing up with him, he always thought I was a bullshitter and made stuff up for attention. So I wanted to ask the folks of the internet. Here we go. When I was a child, a newborn to when I was a toddler, I always was sick and was being hospitalized for weeks at a time, mostly because of my asthma. I had to be in those huge tube thingies, and with some visits, no one would be able to touch me, or else I'd get an infection or something like that. I never asked further about it because I could see it had hurt my mom, so I leave it be. Anyway, after all the hospital visits and week stays, I eventually got better, did some morning breathing treatments, and I was ready to go. I remember this one especially. I was in 3rd grade, going to school and telling my teacher, last night I saw myself. I saw them carrying me, scaring the shit out of my teacher. I remember it clear as if it was yesterday. Her eyes were so white, and facial expression so cold and dead. She smiled and said, "That's nice." What I remember is that I was sleeping, dreaming what kids dream, and just waking up. Getting up and walking around the house like normal. I fell asleep on the couch. It was 8 p.m.-ish, not sure what time it was exactly. It was fall and the sunset was getting pink and orange. Very dim, so I'm thinking it was around 8-ish I woke up. So I go to my room, up into my bed, and go to lie down. I get back up remembering I forgot to take my bedtime medicine for my asthma and allergies. So I walk back up the stairs halfway. I live in a split-level home. I stop at the front door and I see my mom and dad carrying me to her bedroom. They do not see me down at the door. I'm in utter shock and confusion. I'm around like 7 or 8 at the time, not knowing what the hell is happening. I finish going up the stairs and I see them putting me to bed in my mama's bed. I'm moving, pulling the blankets over me, and them walking back out, walking past me. From then I just completely black out and don't remember how I got back into my own body. I wake up in my mom's bedroom, generally confused of what I may or may not have dreamed of. But this is the only time I actively remember being outside of my own alive body. I can also go back out to any memory of mine, replay it not only in my eyes, but be able to see and experience it in someone else's perspective. Being able to see myself in the memory and enjoy it all over again. But it's in the perspective of someone who I don't remember ever being there. I don't know who I am, and I've never been able to see the face of the person I'm watching myself from. I stay awake at night just asking myself how I am able to do this. Is this normal? Can other people do this? Experience this? 2. I'm a paramedic in rural Alabama, and to say that I've seen some really foobar situations would be an understatement. This particular call shook me to my core. To give you a little background, I'm not a small guy, 6'3", 250 pounds. My partner was about the same size. We have both been trained in something called TCCC, Tactical Critical Care Course, certified to work with police, SWAT, and SRT teams. One night we get a call assigned to us from 911 dispatch. Welfare check. Make sure that the caller is okay. We hit our lights and sirens and get en route to the address provided. Recognize it as an unsafe community. I call for the sheriff's department to send a deputy out with us. Thank God we did. As we pulled onto the street, the deputy pulls in behind us and we find the address. There is a scared-looking woman standing on the porch, evidently the caller. "You call 911?" my partner asked as we grab our gear from the ambulance. No verbal response from the woman, just a nod, and her pointing to the front door of the house. The woman looked very gaunt and had obviously hadn't eaten in a few days. The deputy led the way into the house with my partner and me in tow. We didn't even make it past the threshold of the house when we were confronted by another woman. "We don't need you," she said in almost a growl. "Leave." "She is not who I called about," the first woman spoke in a whisper. My deputy looked at the second and said, "Move so they can get to their patient, or we're going to have a problem." She had an almost beastly smile to her when she moved out of the way. "Last room on the left," the first woman said. No lights were on in the house, and a putrid smell was getting stronger the closer we got to the room. The deputy opens the door to reveal a younger-looking man, emaciated, and his limbs restrained to the different points on the bed. An older woman in the corner of the room reading from a Bible. An older man standing next to the bed, a bottle marked "Holy Water," and a crucifix. Both were startled by our appearance, but showed no resistance. The deputy did his job, very professionally and efficiently. My partner moved to the man lying in the bed. "No!" the old man cried out. We paused only for a second and continued to the man. He couldn't have been more than 100 pounds, and you could see his joints and muscles through his skin. He could barely move his head to look at us. As my partner drew closer, several things happened very fast. I heard a snapping sound. The man's right-handed restraint breaking. My partner being pulled towards the patient and struggling to free himself. The old man screaming something in Latin. The deputy wrenching the man's arm off my partner. And my partner vacating the house. The man on the bed screamed with laughter, looked at me, and spoke with a voice full of evil and hate. "Why don't you go check on your," insert gay derogatory term here, "friend?" A second deputy comes running in. "Go check on your partner, we've got this." I walk outside to see my partner kneeling on the ground next to the ambulance, tears streaming down his face. "He knew," he whispered. "He told me about my divorce, my affair, my chosen lifestyle." He looked at me. "Sam, he told me about my wife's miscarriage and her suicide attempt." Our eyes didn't break contact. "He named the drug she tried to overdose on." While my partner gathered himself, I called my online medical director. I told him of the patient's situation, and I received orders to chemically restrain the patient for transport. It took 6 deputies to hold the man down for me to give an intramuscular med to calm him down enough to get him in the back of the ambulance. That was one of the longest rides to the hospital that I have ever taken. 3. At 17, I had gone to live with my aunt. I didn't have my own room. The garage was my room. It's where my friends would hang out and play guitar with me, but ultimately, I slept on the couch. When sleeping on the couch, I always felt like something was watching me. Even when other people were around, I always felt something coming from the hall. I would sleep in my cousin's room when she was at her dad's. I slept in there at least 3 nights a week. Every single time, I woke up at 3:15 on the dot, every single time. I brought this up to my aunt, who had said she had noticed me wake up at the exact same time, and that she would feel things in that area too. She would check on me every time it happened. I never saw anything there, but it was weird. I then went to stay with my brother. He actually lived with one of my childhood friends. See, my brother married the sister of one of my best friends growing up. It was my brother, his wife, my friend, and their mom. They had a spare room that belonged to their other brother who was currently in prison. I used to see weird shit in that room. I once saw an old lady sitting in a chair by the bed. Things would wake me up. I felt like I wasn't wanted in that room. I thought I was being crazy until one night I saw the lady again and slept on the couch instead. So, I just call him D. D was the oldest and was getting out of prison the next day. And I figured he wouldn't want to come home to some 18-year-old sleeping in his bed, so sleeping on the couch was the best idea anyway. He got out of jail, and he chose to sleep on the couch. My brother told me that D said I could sleep in his room. I asked why, and then my brother told me because D is scared of sleeping in his room. That his grandma died in the chair in there, and he says he wakes up to her ghost sitting in the chair. I moved out soon after that. My ex and I then sought to get a place of our own. But the only place that would accept us was some rundown apartment in NWC, okay. I was barely 18 and she was 17, so we were just happy someone rented to us. The apartment has a weird layout. I later found out our apartments were actually converted trailers. So the living room and kitchen were attached to the bedroom, had a long hallway that led to the bathroom. The hallway doubled as a closet. There wasn't a door between the room and the hallway. It was weird. I worked nights, and I'd get calls at 3 a.m. about how she was seeing things near the closet and felt she was being watched. I'd get these calls once a week and come home to her sleeping on the couch with the bedroom door shut. She was a light sleeper and woke up to the sound of me coming home and opening the door. I always had weird feelings about that hallway, but never had seen anything. It was really bad though, because I worked as an overnight grocery stocker. I would hear the occasional noise, but it would be later revealed that most of the employees thought the place was haunted. The most amount of employees that would be there in an overnight shift would be 4. Me, the noob, the shift manager, another stalker, and Jose, the guy who wasn't employed by us but would buff the floors once a week. We didn't stalk every night, only 3 days a week. Our other 2 shifts were cleaning up and putting misplaced items back in their spot. After I gained seniority, I would work solo shifts. From 11, when the place closed, until 9 a.m. when the store would open, although morning employees would start showing up at 6 a.m. So when she was at home with whatever spirit was in the house, I was dealing with a ghost who liked to knock over entire end caps of cans and push buggies into weird spots. One night, I was off from work. We had a few friends over for drinks. We were both playing the sober host for our friends. We didn't drink that night, and after everyone left, I went to grab cigs. And when I came home, she was passed out on the couch. When I left 10 minutes earlier, she was asleep in bed. I tried to wake her up. She was in a super deep sleep. She would wake up long enough to refuse sleeping in the bed. I gave up on trying to move her and passed out in our bed. You always expect the worst hauntings at night. When they happen at 8 a.m. when it's daylight out, it's somehow even more terrifying. I woke up around 7:45. There was no light shining through our curtain, so I assumed it was still night. I woke up in a panic. Maybe I had a nightmare, but I couldn't remember having one. I felt a presence, one I had never felt before. I've had my fair share of ghost encounters at that point in my life, but this was different. I felt something evil all around me. It was like it was in the air. It was hot, like really hot. I was sweating, which made no sense. We were poor. All we had was a thin blanket and a broken heater in January with snow all over the roads. How was it so hot? I was too afraid to look towards the hall. Instead, I looked up at the wood paneling on the wall. It was moving. It was shifting. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Now I've had dreams where I've woken up still in the dream, so my first thought was, I must still be dreaming. Sadly, I wasn't. The walls were almost swirling. I could see them shift into faces. Now, when I say the walls were moving, I mean they were in the same place. But what was on them was changing. I laid my head down and thought, I'm just tired, and I'll try to go back to sleep. As soon as I did, I felt it get even hotter, so I threw off the blanket and ran out of the room. I figured that only that part of the house was haunted. I was safe in the living room. I tried to wake up my ex, who was sleeping on the couch. Like I mentioned, she was a light sleeper. Her body was limp and lifeless. Maybe she was breathing, but it didn't look like it. Her body temp was always so high, but she felt so cold. I turned around to look at the living room wall, which was the other side of the bedroom wall that was shifting. And holy shit, that wall was doing the same fucking thing. I was terrified. I knew I was awake. I wanted to leave, but the roads were awful, and I had no experience driving in the ice. Besides, I didn't have my own car. I wasn't going to take her car and leave her there with whatever the fuck was in there. I grabbed her body and shook it almost violently. Nothing. I pulled her up and shook her again and again, and her lifeless body just dropped back down to the couch. I grabbed her keys and sat in her car. We had no gas, so I didn't turn it on. Just locked the doors and sat in the 10-degree weather. I turned it on long enough to see we had no gas, and it was 8 a.m. I was so terrified. I didn't even notice it was daylight the whole time. I sat in the car until 8:30. I convinced myself I was fucking insane, and I'm freezing my ass off because I'm scared of a ghost. I went back in, and immediately felt the unbearable heat despite holding a door wide open and letting the 10-degree air in. Her body lay exactly where I left it, and the wall shifting at a slower pace. To those who ask why I didn't take a pic, it was January of 2007. We shared a Nokia pay-as-you-go phone from Singular. It could barely display text, much less a pic. I ran back outside. I sat there until just before 9. I walked back in. This time the freezing air filled up the room, and the wall was fine. I look over at her. The look on her face was different now. While this was all happening, she didn't look asleep. She looked awake, with her eyes lightly closed, as if she were just closing her eyes. Like she was there in body but was limp. Now she looked asleep. I could see her breathing. I sat next to her. The feeling of the couch moving as I sat down woke her up. I was relieved. She saw me sitting down next to her and saw my face, which was a mixture of terror and relief, and asked me if I was okay. I wanted to tell her what just happened, but how could I? This girl has to stay here alone while I work. I can't tell her. I said that I was just checking on her. She said she couldn't remember her dream, but she felt someone shaking her and couldn't wake up. It's weird because everything seemed to stop at 9 a.m., which was when I'd get off work. As if all this stuff would happen intentionally while I wasn't there. 9.5 years later, I still haven't told her. I didn't realize at the time that I only had worse encounters in my future. The next time I would deal with the paranormal would be worse. 4. I used to live in what was then called the Shady Lane Apartments in Anderson, California. They might still be called that. We called them the Blue Apartments before they were repainted. In our span of living there, we lived in 3 different apartments. They were really nice for the price, and my stepdad at the time had gone a notch up in pay. So it was a great place to start a new life compared to where we were living. The first apartment we moved into was on the very corner of the place, facing the street, right next to what we called the Brown Apartments. Also a not so bad place to live, but not as nice, in my opinion. This place brings back a ton of memories. And I was 10 when we moved in. I made so many friends at this time, and it was something that didn't happen often with me, because I was kind of a loner. All of the apartments were 2 stories that we lived in. They all had the same basic layout too. You walk into the house and see the living room with kitchen in the back, to the left, and a bathroom to the left of that, along with a back porch patio. The stairs were to the right and contained 3 rooms and another bathroom with a tub. Even though I was 10 years old, I was terrified of the dark. I was one of those kids scared of many things I guess I shouldn't have been. But life made me to. I never really voiced those fears after age 7, but they remained for years because of experiences. Many times in that place, I would go to bed with my parents and sister in their rooms. Everyone was asleep but me because I had a hard time falling asleep. It was always that way, and I would lay in bed just pondering or even fearing life. I'll just skip to the good stuff because I'm taking forever. Essentially, I would be laying in bed with the hall light on while everyone was asleep. I would hear people stomping up the stairs, and usually that would be it. I knew they were our stairs and not the neighbor's stairs because the 2 were determinable. Some of those nights, the stomping would go all the way to my room where the bathroom was, directly across from my room. The bathroom door would fling open, the light would turn on, and the bathroom sink would be turned on. All visible where I was laying because, whatever it was, it never shut the bathroom door. It would stay that way for quite a while, and eventually the sink would turn off, the light would shut off, and the door would stay open. Whatever it was, it could not be seen because the hall light would often be on when this happened. And even when it wasn't on, I had a bright night light that would be on. Nothing was ever seen when this happened. It got even more strange when items would start to disappear from the house. Things that each of us knew that others did not have any interest in for any reason, but would then appear in strange places like in cupboards or closets, where we would never put them. I can't tell you how many times I've heard my name being called by what seemed like my mother, only to be discovered she never called out to me. Even when I would go play outside, it happened often, and even my friends heard it. This continued for some time before we moved into the second apartment. This apartment was rather uneventful, except that I swear, I had head lice so many times living in it. And I was a cautious kid, but I don't have much to report other than that. But the third one, I've already made a post about, where I described an out-of-body experience during an episode of sleep paralysis. Me and my sisters have experienced a variety of things there. They don't talk much about it because we were raised to not believe in those things, and I more or less just marched to the beat of my own drum. I will never forget it. Edit. I had to shower because we were having an unexpected trip to the Olive Garden. I wanted to say earlier that more has happened, especially in the first apartment, often similar to what I listed in my story. Another odd thing is my stepdad's temper. He would become very irate in that place, all of them actually. Even though he was an angry person, often just being in that place made him, many times over, more angry. He would also get violent migraines while we lived there. Just wanted to add this little tidbit. Edit 2. I always seem to forget something. My name is Lucas. It's not a common name in Northern California, especially back then. I was the only kid I ever knew with that name back then, 1990s. And the voice it called out to me was definitely my mom's voice, and my friends knew her well. My mom had a special tone that says, "I'm not in the mood to deal with your shit," that I'm quite sure many of you are familiar with, but in each case, they are unique. Also, the stomping I would hear would sometimes be in the attic. None of us ever went up there, even once, and it would be difficult to get up there without a ladder that we didn't own at the time. The stomping was atrocious sometimes, as if to make sure its presence was well known. Also, I became very ill in those apartments so many times, in a way I never did before or after, as well as my sisters. I was blamed many times for stomping about or slamming doors, when I was the only kid home, knowing I had nothing to do with it. But because my parents didn't believe in that stuff, I just learned to accept that. 5. The first memory I have connected to ghosts is when I was between 2 and 4 years old. My sister wasn't born yet, and I lived with my parents in our old apartment. My grandmother lived in the building across the street, but the apartments were identical. I remember that I frequently spoke with 3 old Indonesian men. I believe these were relatives. My mother's father was Indonesian, and he lost a lot of family members in WO2. He then migrated to where we live now. The 3 men followed me around everywhere, and were always very nice and made me laugh. My mother and grandmother told me that I told them every time I spoke with these gentlemen. I remember vividly how they looked, exactly like my grandfather, who passed away more than 10 years ago. My mother told me that she would find me regularly in the hallway, sitting cross-legged, talking about my toys and life. Mommy made me do this. I ate chips. That sort of thing. You could say my first experience was a very good one. Now, fast forward about 4 to 6 years. My sister was born, and we moved to a bigger house. My room was next to my parents'. My parents have told me that since the day we moved, I didn't want to sleep. Never. I threw tantrums, and I didn't want to be left alone. Since I was about 8 to 10 years old, I do remember this. I thought I was crazy and extremely childish. And oh my, I always had the urge to be an adult, even at that age, for not wanting to be alone. Even worse, alone in the dark. In my room there was a man, a very tall, darker than black man. His eyes, they still make me tear up with fear. I'm 22 now. And he just stared. Every night, he was in my dreams. Every night. I was in a dark forest and I kept running the entire night. And he was always faster than me and catching up on me. One night, I knew something terrible was about to happen. I had woken up with bruises for a couple of nights in a row, and my parents started asking me why I'd hurt myself. That night I told my parents there was a man standing in the corner of the room and beating me up in my dreams. Of course, they didn't believe me, and sat next to me as I fell asleep. That morning I woke up and saw 2 large handprints on the wall. They were solid black and bigger than my father's hands. They had a peanut butter substance to them. My parents got mad at me because they thought I had put some food on the wall. I cried my eyes out and told my parents I wouldn't sleep there. Ever. Anymore. I moved to the attic, and I never saw this entity again. A lot has happened to me ever since, but these are the 2 experiences I had as a kid that made me believe there is more. I also predicted the future at one point, and talked to my past grandfather multiple times after his death. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, Episode 7. That was a pretty good bunch we had this week, wasn't it? Nice long video as well, turned out. I didn't even realise it was going to be that long when I was recording it. Well, I think I must have overexerted myself today because I have acquired a massive headache from somewhere. I'm not sure if it was a combination of the fact that it's been very hot here today, and that I probably did a lot more walking around than I should have in that heat. Bloody Pokemon Go. You just give me the damn balls, don't make me go looking for them. Although I'm quite fortunate there's quite a few Pokestops in my town. And that's all I'm going to say about that game. I know a lot of people aren't into it. I don't want to keep bringing it up. Okay, so I think I'm just going to go lie down and close my eyes for a while. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.